gotta go potty.
Hello and welcome back to the Darkling Chronicles. My name is Becky and I tell you real life ghost stories. Now these stories come from people who have sent them to me through TikTok or emailed them to me. I speak to these people. So as far as I am aware, they are 100% true. Or at least these people believe this is what they saw. So I'm going to go through 4 or 5 ghost stories, really good ones that I've already posted on my TikTok page, which is at the Darkling Chronicles if you want to go check it out. This first one that I'm going to share with you actually comes from a lady who would like to remain anonymous. But she actually had a picture that came with this story. So what I'll do is I will upload on my website www.tdc25.com. There's ghost stories on there which people tell me, which I've uploaded just in written text so that people can read them if they want to rather than listen to them. I will add this on there. I haven't given this story a name, which is now a thing on my TikTok page. I name every single story. But I'm going to call this Grandad in the Window so that you know how to find it on my website. But this is the lady's story. I'm going to read it to you now. She says, "Hi, I came across your page a few days ago and instantly followed. I love anything paranormal. I had so many experiences over the years. My old flat was haunted and I once saw a little boy dressed like a chimney sweep. But the reason I'm reaching out to you is because I think you might be interested in something that happened to me. My grandparents passed away about 13 years ago, and a few years back, my brother happened to be passing by their old home. He took a photo of the living room window and sent it to me, just as a little reminder of where he'd been. At the time, I looked at the photo carefully, but didn't notice anything unusual. It just brought back fond memories and I didn't think much of it. But about a year later, the same photo popped up as a memory on my phone. And this time, I saw something I couldn't believe. Clear as day, I could see my granddad looking down at my brother from the window. His face, his hair, his coat, shirt and tie, it was all there. I still can't wrap my head around how he wasn't in the photo the first time I saw it. But then it appeared later. It's undeniably him. If this isn't proof that spirits exist, I don't know what would be. Now, my page is known to have a lady called Karrie. She's Irish, she's hilarious. Her and her partner have had some really creepy experiences and she sent me a couple of ghost stories. So the next couple are actually from her. And be ready because these are scary and you have to think, we're just listening to this. And I don't know if you've experienced anything, but I've never experienced something to this level of paranormal activity before. So I cannot even comprehend how it must feel experiencing something this terrifying. And touch wood, I don't want to. So Karrie says, "So back in 2018, my partner and I moved into a rented place. Everything was great at first, but after a few months, weird little things started happening. Cupboards would be open when we hadn't touched them. Water would randomly be in the basin. Small things, but enough to make us uneasy. One evening, I was in the shower after work when I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. Then I heard my partner's voice ask, 'You okay, babe?' I answered, brushed it off and moved on. Later, as I was drying off in my bedroom, my back turned to the door facing the mirror. I saw a black silhouette of a woman standing in the doorway. The second I turned to look, she was gone. Again, I forgot about it. After a few smokes, I went to bed. At 3:50 a.m, I woke up completely unable to move or breathe. I heard a commotion downstairs, then my guinea pigs let out an awful squeal. Panicked, I ran down to find their unit almost pulled off the table. The washing machine was open and the clothes had been yanked out. I looked in the mirror and that's when I saw them. Hand marks around my throat. My eyes were bloodshot, my lips were a pale shade of blue and I had bruises on my knees. I went to work and told my friends what had happened. And then things got really weird. During lockdown, my partner was home alone and kept hearing my voice upstairs talking to her, but I was at work. One night I made a joke about it to my co-workers, and right then, my partner texted me, "Are you talking about the ghost? It's getting angry." And it did. We couldn't sleep, electronics would turn on, even when they were unplugged. My partner would wake up with bruises. We were sleeping in separate rooms because I worked crazy hours. Every time we even talked about moving, something would happen. Picture frames falling, loud banging, up and down the stairs, even random dead mice appearing in the middle of the floor. And any time I mentioned it at work, she knew and she got angrier. Eventually we did move, and while the activity hasn't completely stopped, things in our lives took a turn for the worse. I lost my job, COVID, getting seizures, being homeless for a while, and then finally getting a house, only to lose our 9-year-old dog, my absolute best friend. And now my partner and I just keep getting sicker, and no doctors can figure out why. That story gives me chills. Karrie's stories are seriously scary, and it just doesn't stop there. The next story that she had for me is called The Devil and His Chains. I started to name my TikTok stories at this point. So if you want to go and watch this, you can watch it on my TikTok. But she says, back in the late 80s or early 90s, my grandmother's aunt was dying, and she wanted to pass away at home. The family gathered in her bedroom, my mum, her nieces, my nan, and a few others. Then suddenly the room went ice cold. My nan knew what was coming. She told the older families to move the wardrobe in front of the door. And just as they did, they heard it. Pounding footsteps racing up the stairs, chains dragging behind them. Then the growling started. Whatever it was began pushing against the door, trying to force its way in. But they weren't taking any chances. They shoved the bed up against it too. This was a deeply religious household, and in the moment, everyone sprang into action. Holy water was being thrown, prayers were being shouted. The air was thick with fear, but they knew they had to keep her alive, because if she passed while the rattling continued, he would have taken her soul. And then it stopped. The house fell silent. An hour later, she took her last breath. Reading that has given me chills, and it does every time I read that story. And I don't know why, I think it's just deeply terrifying, because it sounds like a clip straight out of a horror film. It doesn't sound like it should be real life. And if you read the comments to this, we didn't know if her aunt was maybe not a nice person, if there's something evil coming up the stairs to come and claim her. But it turns out it was actually just the house. There was something that the family knew was in the house, and because they were deeply religious and intuitive to this house, they knew that it would try and take her. And I've never experienced anything like that on that level, so I don't know how they knew, but they knew. Now, I got sent this next story such a long time ago. I can't remember who sent it to me. However, the story is called Who the F is Alice? And this person has sent me this story through TikTok. So she says, I used to work in a hotel in North Wales. It was an old building, and the oldest parts, the foundations, were actually from a monastery that had been demolished during the reign of Henry VIII. The hotel had about 15 rooms, and while I've had similar experiences in other places, I've never had such vivid ones as I did whilst working there. I often worked the night shift and would lock up after all the guests had returned. They had keys to come and go, but I would secure the kitchens and the bar. When I locked the front door, the hallway, the grand staircase, they were always freezing cold, despite the fact a large coal fire was burning nearby. Some nights I would hear children running around upstairs giggling. On one occasion I decided to check on them. After all, it was a big old building with a lot of winding corridors, and even a turret with stone stairs. It was very dangerous. I went up to the 3rd floor, but I couldn't find them. Confused, I went back to check the register, but there were no children booked in on that floor. The next day I asked the owner about it, and he casually said it was most likely Alice. I assumed Alice was his daughter and didn't think much of it, but a few weeks later it happened again and again. I ignored it at first, but eventually I mentioned it to my boss. I said, "It's not my business, but don't you worry about Alice playing near those stairs." He looked really confused for a moment and then said with a smirk, "If she fell, it wouldn't be so bad, seeing as she's already dead." Then he laughed. I just thought he's eccentric and tried to put it out of my mind. A week later, I was locking up again. It was winter and I didn't have any guests staying, though the bar had been open for a dinner service. As I pulled the door shut, I saw her, a little girl in a white dress with black hair and a white cloth cap, sitting on the offshoot staircase, staring down at me. To be honest, I just thought nope and closed the door. The next day, or maybe the day after, I was chatting with the cleaner. I casually asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" She immediately replied, "Why? Who have you seen?" She went on to tell me that the hotel had a lot of activity, from chanting in the cellar to an old man who sits in the bar. There was also Alice, as well as a ghostly dog, a cat, a woman in a black dress, and a young man dressed in a 90s style climbing gear. Oh, and an old couple who sat silent in the dining room. I love that story. I think it's brilliant. Like, who was Alice? Why was she there? There sounds like there's so many ghosts there just chilling. I think the lady who sent that did actually send me the location of where that is. I'd have to go back through my messages, but what a brilliant story. Now, this next story is from Sarah K. I call her Welsh Sarah. She's amazing. She's followed my page from day one, and this is the first story actually that she ever sent to me. She says, "Hi, I'm a nurse and trained predominantly at East Glamorgan Hospital in Pontypridd. It was an old military hospital with a history of strange goings-on. One night I'd just started a night shift and popped into the kitchen to grab a cuppa for a patient. The kitchens were massive with big, heavy wooden doors that were difficult to open and took 5 good minutes to close. As I was pouring hot water into the cup, someone grabbed my ponytail so hard that it snapped my head back. I spun round, ready to give someone a piece of my mind, but no one was there. Before I could process what had just happened, the door slammed shut behind me, and it slammed so hard that I jumped and shouted, 'Fuck!' But here's the thing, those doors couldn't slam. They were too heavy. Later I told my boss what had happened, and she calmly said, 'Ah, yes, that happens a lot here, but it's all meant in a mischievous manner, nothing to be scared of.' But the night wasn't over. While making my rounds, I glanced down the long walled corridors, lined with bays of 8 beds on either side. I saw someone was out of bed. I turned to my colleague and said, 'Can you give me a hand? Someone's up.' He looked at me completely serious and replied, 'Nobody can walk down that end of the ward, lovely. No one in those beds is physically able to get up.' So Sarah says, what exactly did I see? It's another incredible story, and the funniest part is that Sarah doesn't understand what she's seen herself, and she is the funniest person to talk to. So it just makes me laugh, her ghost stories, because she's genuinely freaked out. Now, this next story is also from a lady who follows my page. And she says, "My auntie used to live in a 4-storey house. The front door was on the 2nd floor and her living room was on the ground floor. The 2nd floor also had the dining room and kitchen. Most of the time we'd all be downstairs in the living room, but whenever I was upstairs helping with the dishes or cooking, I'd always feel a tug on my top or noises nearby. But every time I turned around, no one was there. I asked my auntie if she'd ever experienced anything like that. She described exactly what I had experienced, but also told me something else. Sometimes she would hear a little child's voice calling out, 'Mum.' But again, when she turned around, there was no one there. The strangest part is her children and I would be outside in the garden or all the way up on the 4th floor in my cousin's bedroom. Even though I never felt like anything would harm me, whenever I stayed over, I could still feel the presence of a child nearby. It never tried to hurt me, but it was always there." Now, this lady has sent me another story in her aunt's house again. And she says, downstairs in her living room, there was an old record player, the kind where you had to manually flip the record and it didn't turn over automatically. One day, my mum's Air Supply record was playing. It reached the end, and as it just clicked off, something strange happened. The record flipped itself and started playing on the other side. No one was downstairs. My mum, auntie and her husband were all in the kitchen dining room at the time. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. Later that night, while they were all sitting in the living room, my uncle got into a heated argument with my auntie. Right in the middle of it, a picture frame from the wall opposite my uncle suddenly flew across the room, narrowly missing his head. From that night on, my uncle never raised his voice in that house again. Now, me and that lady did actually have a conversation after she told me that story, and I can't go into detail, but it may seem that the spirit had a good reason to throw something at that uncle. Yeah. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, that if there is a spirit in your house that thinks a lot of you, it will actually protect you. And I think it was really protective of her auntie, which is so lovely. When you think of spirit like that, it takes away the fear, because you get obviously all kinds of spectrums, don't you, of spirits. You know, the bad ones, but generally there's probably some out there that are just kind of stuck souls, and that makes me feel really sad for them. So the last ghost story that I'm going to tell you for tonight is from a lady who also follows my TikTok page, and she says, "Last year my friends were heading away at some ridiculously early hour, so my partner child and I stayed over at their place to look after the dogs in the morning. Around 10 p.m, while we were getting ready for bed, I started hearing banging sounds, like things being dropped from a height. It was odd, but we brushed it off and went to bed. My partner and I stayed in their daughter's room. I was closer to the door as he was near the wall. During the night I kept feeling like someone was watching me, but every time I looked, there was nothing, no noise, no movement. A few hours passed. Suddenly a loud bang jolted me awake. My partner was still fast asleep. I tried shaking the feeling of unease and went back to sleep. But then, just as I was drifting off, a massive crash erupted inside the room. I shot up and saw things being thrown from the dresser. Items that couldn't have fallen on their own. No one else was there, not even the cats. And the worst part is, a pair of scissors previously tucked away under a heavy book was thrown onto the bed, not at me, but directly towards my partner. It became clear that whoever haunted that room does not like men. I didn't sleep a wink after that, and honestly, for the entire week I stayed there, I could never settle." That is terrifying. Can you imagine that being real? My God, that's awful. So that's it for tonight's ghost stories. I say tonight because I'm sat here at 5 to 10 recording these ghost stories for you whilst I'm home alone. I don't know what's wrong with me or what's going on. Am I going to sleep? Probably not. But it's all good. I love telling you these stories and I love receiving them. If you have TikTok, you can send me a message on there. You can go to my profile, click message, send me as many messages as you want. I love it. We'll have a chat. Or you can email me, thedarklingchronicles25@gmail.com. Or you can go to my website, www.tdc25.com, and go to contact me and upload your story there. I love reading them. Thank you so much for listening to the Ghost Tea this week. I will be back shortly with another podcast.